On this Thursday night, flash flooding paralyzes some of America's biggest cities.
This is unprecedented. I think this is the worst I've ever seen.
The record rain, the rescues, and the role of climate change. Our Jackson Proskow is in Philadelphia tonight. Rising frustration with Alberta's Premier. Could Jason Kenney's plummeting popularity hurt the federal Conservatives? Spreading vital information as COVID spreads.
We have zero leadership right now.
The Alberta doctors and scientists giving COVID briefings because the province is not. And the transition to clean energy, what the future holds for oil and gas workers.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
We are in Alberta's capital, Edmonton, tonight. When the pandemic hit, this province was in a tougher position economically than the country as a whole. Hit by COVID and a massive oil price crash. And what happens in Alberta doesn't stay in Alberta. Good evening and thanks for joining us. Alberta has the world's third largest oil reserves and is still one of the key drivers of Canada's economy. And despite efforts to transition to clean energy, no one has figured out how to quickly replace the enormous wealth oil and gas generates for Albertans and for Canadians. We're going to look more deeply at the notion of a just transition in a little bit. But first to the United States, and another sign just how unprepared our cities are for extreme weather supercharged by climate change. Entire communities are underwater. In New York City, flash flooding shut that city down. Subway stations gushed with water. Roads turned to raging rivers.
Oh my God, this poor person's floating. Oh my God, this is terrible.
In just 1 hour, 8 centimeters of rain fell in New York's Central Park, the most ever recorded there in a single hour. Scenes like that played out across New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. There are reports more than 40 people have been killed, some trapped in basement apartments as the water surged in. Jackson Proskow is in Philadelphia tonight. Jackson, the rain has stopped, the sun is out now, but the water is still everywhere.
It really is, Donna. It has just started to recede here in downtown Philadelphia, but at one point these cars would have been entirely submerged. And stories like this are unfolding up and down the northeastern United States as they begin to tally the toll of lives lost and property damaged. The scope of the flooding is unprecedented. So is the scale of the rescue mission.
I think this is the worst I've ever seen. I've been through a few floods as an elected official in this community. I have never seen it this intense and this widespread.
By helicopter, by boat, and even by bulldozer, rescuers pulled thousands of stranded people from their homes and cars. The water came up so fast and so unexpectedly that few had time to prepare.
I know we lost everything, but materialistic everything, that you can just repair, but family you can't bring back, you know what I mean? So what I'm very thankful for is for my parents, my family that are out the house.
The remnants of powerful Hurricane Ida spawned tornadoes in Maryland and New Jersey. But it was the rain, up to 250 millimeters in just a few hours, that brought catastrophe. An entire month's worth of precipitation and then some. Flooding New York's subway, submerging cars and swamping houses and apartments. Among the dead are people who drowned in their own homes, including a 2-year-old boy.
An extraordinary, sadly tragic, historic 24 hours in New Jersey. There's no other way to put it.
With some of the largest cities in the U.S. deluged simultaneously, just days after Ida ripped a path of destruction across the Gulf Coast, officials openly acknowledged the role of a changing climate.
The future we spoke about in dire terms, that future is now. It's happening. We're losing lives, we're losing property.
Beyond the incalculable loss of life and the monumental cleanup is the fear about what lies ahead. Ida serving as both a disaster and a warning about the future. And we want to give you a sense of the cleanup job facing cities big and small in this region. Take a look at these images. This is a freeway that cuts right through Philadelphia. It looks like a canal right now. It is, in fact, a freeway, obviously not supposed to be filled with water like that. But that tells you just how much water is out there and just how much has to be cleaned up in the days to come. Donna?
So much work ahead. Jackson Proskow in Philadelphia. Thank you. We turn back to Alberta now and the fraught political climate here in the midst of a serious fourth wave of COVID-19. There is frustration in Alberta, much of it directed at Premier Jason Kenney, who now holds the title of least popular premier in Canada. Doctors and nurses are incensed that in the midst of a fourth wave, most public health restrictions have been lifted.
Everyone has the right.
Alberta has by far the most active cases of COVID-19 in Canada, more than 12,000, and more than 480 people are in the hospital right now, 114 of them in intensive care. That's almost double the number a week ago. The vast majority are unvaccinated. All acute care beds are taken, is the message from the mayor of Edson, Alberta. 40% of them have COVID patients under the age of 55. Those looking for leadership are getting none. As school starts, parents and administrators are on their own. Neither Alberta's chief medical health officer nor Premier Jason Kenney have held a briefing for 3 weeks. So a group of doctors and scientists are filling the void.
We are seeing a big physical and emotional capacity issue with healthcare workers,
holding their own COVID-19 briefings. I spoke to ER physician Dr. Joe Vipont.
We have zero leadership right now. We haven't seen any of our politicians. We haven't seen our chief medical officer of health. We're getting really getting no help as citizens, and so there's a real desperation out there for people to get knowledge so that they can make good decisions on risk and mitigating risk, and so we're hoping to provide that.
What are you hearing from ICU doctors and nurses?
Healthcare workers, but other healthcare workers in COVID wards are being abused by the patients because a lot of these people are anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers that are quite angry with the fact that they have COVID. They're quite angry that they have to be in hospital, and there's actually significant amounts of healthcare worker abuse going on right now, which is tragic when we're just trying to do our jobs. It's a really, really hard time to be working in healthcare in Alberta.
The Premier has been absent for weeks. There have been no public health briefings from the medical officer of health. What do you think is going on there? Do you think that's a strategy?
Well, I can tell you that we have zero mitigation measures in place. Zero. We have no masking. We have no physical distancing requirements. We have no limitations on gatherings. And I'm not sure if this is intentional, but the consequence of this is that COVID is going to run rampant through our unvaccinated population.
On top of all that, the province wants to cut nurses' salaries by 3%. And many Albertans, including Conservatives, are fed up.
I mean, there's just a lot of things recently, especially when it came to Jason Kenney and the stuff that he's been doing, especially when it came to the nurses and stuff that I don't really believe in.
My wife's in the healthcare industry, so yeah, not very popular right now.
The cuts to the nurses' salaries?
Yes.
Still, for $40, you can buy this hat, Best Summer Ever, a fundraiser for Kenney's United Conservative Party, a time-limited offer. Lots of people have been wondering, where is Premier Kenney? Well, he reappeared, sort of, yesterday after being absent for 3 weeks. He did a Facebook Live session choosing which questions to answer, and he said he's back at work in his office. With me from the Alberta Legislature is Global Edmonton's Tom Vernon. Tom, all of this is happening during a federal election campaign. Could this disappointment with Jason Kenney affect support for the federal Conservatives?
Well, Donna, you hear on the radio commercials linking Premier Jason Kenney with Conservative leader Erin O'Toole. The opposition obviously think that they can make hay with that. I spoke with one Conservative candidate who says out door knocking, he hears disappointment, anger towards Premier Jason Kenney, and it is impacting support. He has to turn that conversation back to, well, how do you feel about Justin Trudeau? And let's take care of that in Ottawa. Interestingly enough, during his Facebook Live last night with Albertans, Premier Kenney said he did not want to insert himself into the federal election campaign. This coming from someone widely regarded as one of the best campaigning Conservatives in the country.
And Tom, in the last federal election, the Liberals lost the 2 seats they held here in Edmonton. What's your sense of the political climate now and the chance of winning those back?
Well, they hope that the anger against Premier Jason Kenney will lead to gains here in Edmonton. The 2 seats that they lost last time around, they believe they have a very strong chance in winning those ones back. Edmonton Centre is one of them. They have a long history of victories in that seat. Anne McClellan won it a number of times in very close elections. Now, it's not just the Liberals who think they can make gains here. but the NDP do as well. They hold the only non-Conservative seat in this province, in Edmonton-Strathcona. They think they can win another one. Jagmeet Singh actually campaigned here in the first week of the campaign, something he did not do last time around.
All right, and back to Premier Kenney. What's your intel on his strategy? Why lay low as COVID cases climb instead of showing leadership and being front and center?
Yeah, the Premier's in a very difficult position here. At the end of June, when he was announcing his reopening plan, he all but declared the pandemic over in Alberta due to vaccination rates climbing. He said when he opens the economy, it's not just open for summer, it is open for good. Now the cases are rising, and he's facing a tough decision to make. He had a COVID cabinet committee meeting yesterday. They're meeting again today. Sources say that was very divided on which way to go. He also has a strong element in his caucus that is very opposed to any form of COVID-19 restrictions and has been for much of the pandemic. So he has to manage his leadership, he has to manage the rising cases, and he has to do so in light of what he said in June. And also he was on vacation for 2 weeks at a time. Nurses were being told they would have to cancel their vacation to deal with these rising cases. Donna?
All right. Tom Vernon at the Alberta Legislature, thanks. A global transition away from fossil fuels is underway, and as it happens, jobs in the oil and gas industry will continue to disappear. The idea of a just transition, that a healthy economy and a clean environment can and should coexist, sounds great, but it is easier said than done. Tonight, Heather Yourex-West explores what a just transition means and who is caught up in it.
In 1992, it was cod. The collapse of the Atlantic Canada cod fisheries killed tens of thousands of jobs. Entire families lost their livelihoods almost overnight. 30 years later, hundreds of thousands of oil and gas workers wonder if they'll be next.
There's no doubt anymore that we are transitioning away from fossil fuels and that transition is moving faster than we expected. And just kind of burying our heads in the sand isn't helping workers.
Employment in the industry has gone from more than 228,000 positions in 2014 to about 188,000 now. Over 40,000 jobs have disappeared in just 7 years. And while more job loss may be inevitable, there is belief the pain can be minimized if there is a plan.
Our research shows that you could phase out direct fossil fuel employment in Canada over a 20-year period, do it gradually, and almost all of the adjustment can be taken up through early retirements and other voluntary transitions.
It's being called a just transition, ensuring workers aren't left high and dry as Canada and the world moves away from fossil fuels.
We have to make a living, and where we come from in northern Alberta, it's oil and gas.
Janine Campbell-Cove is from the Saulteaux First Nation near Grand Prairie. She's worked on pipelines in northern Alberta for close to 2 decades.
I know a lot of people were like, what do you do? What are we going to do? What can we do? And the answer was always the same. You can't do anything.
For Indigenous workers like Campbell Cove, transitioning out of oil and gas can mean having to move away from their First Nations communities. Last year, an injury left her no other choice.
I have been working in the industry for about 12, 13 years, pretty much straight out of high school.
Stephen Bueller wants out of oil and gas. It's why he volunteers with Iron and Earth, a collective of oil and gas workers calling on government to help people like him find new career paths.
Maybe geothermal projects or helping support wind and the solar industry as well.
Not everyone is eager to leave. Iggy Domagowski is the CEO of Tundra Process Solutions. While he believes his company will continue to serve the oil and gas industry for the rest of his career, he sees things are changing too.
We'll always continue to focus on oil and gas, but a lot of the capital projects like building these large oil sands facilities, those aren't really happening anymore. So naturally, over time, our business has diversified and will continue to diversify.
Because across this sector, no one can afford to be left behind. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Canada's employers are struggling. Coming up, good help has been hard to find. The pandemic's impact on the job market. We are at the University of Alberta, which is on Treaty 6 territory and within the Métis homelands of the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 4. Edmonton is on the traditional territory of the Cree, Blackfoot, Dene, Stoney, Saulteaux, and Blackfoot people. We're back in a moment. You may have noticed help wanted signs in lots of storefronts and restaurants. Despite high unemployment, some industries are having trouble hiring enough workers. And Gaviola explains the employment paradox.
Across the country, popular holiday destinations have looked a little different this year. The pandemic has forced closures and modifications at restaurants and stores, and a labor shortage the likes of which employers have never seen before. Quebec's Mont-Tremblant was grappling with labor shortages before COVID, but the pandemic has made it much worse. Immigration is at a relative standstill, and many workers are choosing government support or moving on from the service industry. They may have childcare issues and safety concerns, and with students returning to school in the fall, hiring is expected to become even more of a challenge, so Tremblant will recruit internationally.
They go to France, they go to Middle East, they go to Latin America, and we have great stories to tell people who are happy to embrace these jobs.
Even in Alberta, which has suffered job losses in the oil patch, the pool of candidates has shrunk during the pandemic. The Business Council of Alberta says employers are having trouble filling positions across the board, from energy to agriculture, with labor shortages most acute in hospitality.
What that falls back to is immigration, and both in terms of temporary foreign workers and immigration numbers overall have been reduced.
The Conference Board of Canada's top economist says wages for new hires have risen 7% compared to pre-COVID levels. In some fields like healthcare and tech, it's a job seekers market. A new KPMG survey shows nearly 70% of employers are struggling to find qualified tech workers.
The innovation economy is now 12% of our GDP and is growing 3 to 6 times faster than any other segment of our GDP. So we definitely need new skills to participate in this area.
A high national unemployment rate, along with a growing skills gap and new labor shortages, are all symptoms of how work has changed during the pandemic. The next federal government needs to keep a close eye on all these factors or risk jeopardizing the post-pandemic recovery. Anne Gaviola, Global News, Toronto.
Still ahead, Canada and coal. We still mine lots of it and export it. When will that end? Canada is reducing its dependence on coal for electricity, though some provinces, like here in Alberta, still use it. And there is pressure for the federal government to stop the export of coal too, because, as Eric Sorensen reports, wherever coal is burned, it contributes to greenhouse gases and to climate change.
It's a panorama they don't feature in the scenic tourism videos. Mountains of coal awaiting export on British Columbia's west coast. If you thought Canada was just about done with coal, it's more complicated than that. Ontario shut down, with some drama, its coal-fired power stations a few years ago. And while Alberta plans to get out in the next couple of years, plants in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick say they may have to burn thermal coal beyond Ottawa's 2030 deadline.
It is our responsibility as a utility to make sure we do that in a prudent fashion.
This week, the Liberal campaign went further, promising to stop exporting thermal coal by 2030.
With so many affordable and cleaner options available, the use of coal for producing electricity simply must come to an end.
But exports are not coming to an end yet. The Vista coal mine in Alberta produces thermal coal and is seeking permission to expand its operations to export more. Much of Canada's coal, like this massive operation in southeastern BC, is steel-making coal for export. Most Canadian coal mines are in BC and Alberta. In an average year, more than 30 million tons, mostly coal to make steel, is shipped through the West Coast ports to Asia. But along with it, carbon-intensive thermal coal that critics say Canada should not be exporting.
The atmosphere doesn't care where we burn this coal. So there's no question that the export of coal is not consistent with our climate targets here in Canada. So it's something we definitely need to move away from.
Canada isn't just exporting our coal to Asia, we're exporting American coal. Mining companies in Montana and Wyoming also produce thermal coal for Asian markets, but they have run into environmental roadblocks in states like Washington and Oregon. So they are detouring their coal into this country and then on to Asia.
They're trying to send that coal somewhere else to burn, and Canada has provided a port for them to do that.
We take responsibility for being green leaders in phasing out coal when the exact opposite is the case.
It will be hard enough to phase out thermal coal use and exports by 2030. And until then, millions of tons of coal will ship from and through this country to be burned overseas. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Next, the resilience of New Yorkers facing hard truths about climate change. If we needed another example of how unprepared our cities are for the extreme weather climate change is creating, we just got it. People and businesses on the American East Coast were getting back on their feet after COVID, now hit by record flash flooding, and digging deep to find hope.
Oh my God!
This is insane. Yesterday morning, the report was 3 to 6 inches over the course of the whole day, which was not a particularly problematic amount. That turned into the biggest single hour of rainfall in New York City history with almost no warning.
It's horrendous. Honestly, we lost so much stuff. Majority of this is going to go in the garbage. This is really damaging. I don't know how my dad will be able to do it.
So now we've got to change the ground rules. From now on, what I think we do is tell New Yorkers to expect the very, very worst. It may sound alarmist at times, but unfortunately it's being proven by nature.
We're all going to come together and we're going to figure out a solution and we'll go from there.
That is Global National for this Thursday night. I'm Donna Friesen. We leave you tonight with one last view of Alberta's capital. I'll be back at the Anchor desk tomorrow, and next week I am on the road again. And next Thursday we'll be in Bedeque, Nova Scotia. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.